Good evening. In today's session, we are going to take a look at Jumbles that appeared in CAT 2019 in the morning slot number one. There were total of 7 questions. 4 of them were theta, and 3 questions were odd one out. So let us start. I will give you 2 minutes per question. I would like you to solve the question on your own first, and then we'll discuss the answer. The instructions for question number 1 to 4, they are that the 4 sentences labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, when properly sequenced, form a coherent paragraph. You have to decide on the proper order for the sentence and key in this sequence of 4 numbers as your answer. Let's start with question number 1, and your time starts now. Okay, now let's try to see how we can arrange these 4 statements. Which statement is going to be the first statement? We know that statement number 1 cannot be the first statement because statement number 1 talks about this collaborative filtering. You need to know which collaborative filtering are you talking about. So an antecedent is required. Number 1 cannot start. Similarly, if you look at statement number 2 says these algorithms. So first you need to know which algorithm you're talking about. Similarly, if you read number 3, if you peruse the statement number 3, it talks about the algorithm. Okay, when you say the algorithm has no way of knowing, so you have already introduced the algorithm to me first, only then you are using the definitive article the for the algorithm. All this tells us that our most generalized statement is number 4, because number 4 introduces the concept of collaborative filtering. It tells us that collaborative filtering is a mathematical algorithm by which correlations and co-occurrences of behaviors are tracked and then used to make recommendations. Now, how they track behavior, what kind of recommendations they make, this is exemplified in number 1. So he tells you in number one that you must have seen a little line of text on websites that says something like customers who bought this also enjoyed that. So if you have seen this, you have experienced this collaborative filtering firsthand. So which collaborative filtering are we discussing? The antecedent is in number four. So this is collaborative filtering. Okay. Then you will go to number two. Number two tells you that there is a problem. The problem with these algorithms is that they don't take into account a host of nuances and circumstances that might interfere with the accuracy. So these algorithms may not be accurate. And to exemplify it, he has given you the example in number three. He tells you that you just bought a book, a gardening book, but this was as a gift for someone. However, the algorithm has no way of knowing that you personally hate gardening and you bought the book only as a gift. So it will target you as a customer for a gardening book. That is the problem. So number three gives you an example of the problem you face because of these algorithms. And that is why, as rightly marked by you, the correct order of the sentences is 4, 1, 2, 3. Question number two. You have 2 minutes. Please start. Right. So if we look at the arrangement, what exactly should be the arrangement? Uh, Number three talks about mind reading. Number four talks about print reading. They talk about specific things, right? And in fact, number four tells you that print reading is like mind reading. So before you select number four, you have to first tell me everything about mind reading. Number three tells you what mind reading looks like. Number two, if you see, introduces mind reading because it tells you that mind reading is a lost cognitive instinct. What exactly is mind reading? It is our capacity to think of ourselves and others as having beliefs, desires, thoughts, and feelings. So, if I have to make a choice, two, three, and four, I think two is the most generalized one because it introduces the concept of mind reading. Number one, Number one talks about people having difficulty. Some people have difficulty in print reading, some people have difficulty in mind reading. So it talks about difficulties associated with people, the difficulties people face with both print reading and mind reading. But I think before you talk about the difficulties, you need to tell me what exactly is print reading and mind reading. On that basis, number two is going to be the first statement because it introduces mind reading, and mind reading has to come before print reading because in number four he is equating print reading and mind reading. So in order to talk about print reading, first you need to discuss mind reading. Statement number two is the first one. It tells you what is mind reading. Number three elaborates on that. It discusses further what does mind reading look like. It looks increasingly like literacy, and literacy is a skill we know is not in our genes. Why is he saying this? Because scripts have been around for only 5,000 to 6,000 years. So literacy is not genetic. Then he will go to number four and say that print reading is like mind reading and it varies across cultures. It also depends heavily on certain parts of the brain and it is subject to developmental disorders. If you pay attention, number one talks about developmental disorders. Okay, for example, development disorders like dyslexia and autism, autism spectrum disorder. So it tells you that both mind reading and print reading, they vary across cultures and they're also subject to developmental disorders. And then he proves his point by telling you that people who have dyslexia have difficulty with print reading, whereas people with autism spectrum disorder, they have difficulty with mind reading. So dyslexia and autism, both are developmental disorders. That is why the order of the statements is going to be 2, 3, 4, 1 for question number 2. I'll move to question number 3 if you have no doubts here. Your time starts now. Okay, let's try to arrange the sentences. If you see, then this particular paragraph is discussing a phrase called carpe diem. So I think because this phrase is introduced in number three should be the starting point. It tells you that the phrase carpe diem, which actually means seize the day. Okay. Now this phrase, it has gone on to inspire countless people in how they live their lives, and it motivates us to see the world a little differently from the norm. So the phrase carpe diem, it translates to seize the day. The reality of this phrase is that you'll go to number two, that carpe diem is actually a horticultural metaphor. So this was an expression that was used in horticulture. Okay, and when you look at its context according to its source, then the real meaning of carpe diem is plucking the day. Plucking the day, which means plucking and gathering of ripening fruits of flowers, enjoying a moment that is rooted in the sensory experience of nature. It is unrelated to the force implied in seizing. So it has nothing to do. Originally, the expression carpe diem had nothing to do with seizing. That is how it is translated these days. But the scholars point that it's actually a horticultural metaphor. It comes from horticulture. What does this tell us? Because we have kind of mistranslated it, this tells us. So it is an example. It is an example means this expression, this metaphor is an example. I need to go to number four. It is an example of one of the telling ways that we mistranslate metaphors from one language to another. And when we mistranslate metaphors, what do? We reveal our hidden assumptions about what we really value. So there has been a mistranslation of the expression carpe diem, and this mistranslation shows our hidden assumptions. From this, he forms the conclusion. From this, he forms the conclusion that metaphors, they may be able to map similar meanings across languages. It's possible, but what happens is that subtle differences can have a profound effect on our understanding of the world. We very easily we translate one metaphor from one language to another, but the reality is that subtle differences can have a profound effect on our understanding of the world. Now, why is this coming in the end? Number one is coming in the end because this is the conclusion he forms after he discusses the phrase carpe diem and tells us that it actually comes from a horticultural metaphor. That is why the order of the statements should be three, two, four, one. Okay? Anybody has any doubt? Okay, in that case, let's come to question number four. Your time starts now. Okay, let's try to arrange these statements. You know that statement number one cannot be your first statement because it uses the expression until then. So you need to know until when. So first you need a context. Similarly, statement number two cannot start because it starts with the word perhaps. We normally use the word perhaps when we have already stated something and we want to say something additional. So number two also cannot start. If you look at statement number four, so your starting statement is either three or four. Which one is more generalized? If you look at statement number four talks about a new norm arising. In order to say a new norm will arise, you need to first tell me what norm are you talking about? A new norm for what? Okay, so some context is needed, which means that the first statement will be number three. Number three is a statement that does not require any antecedent from anywhere. Because number three says, as we grow more comfortable with social media conversations being part of the way we interact every day, we are going to have to learn how to deal with legitimate criticism. So because there is increasing social media conversations, we will have to learn how to deal with legitimate criticism. How will we will have to learn how to deal with legitimate criticism. This thought is taken forward in number two. He says, perhaps. Okay, so we will have to learn. We will have to learn this, how to deal with legitimate criticism. Perhaps we will need to learn to condense. So this is the second thing we will need to learn. We will need to learn to condense the feedback we receive online so that 100 replies carry the same weight as just one. So these are two things that we will have to learn. Three and two will have to come together. Now, when we will learn, what will happen? The consequence is number four, a new norm will arise. So we will have to learn how to condense the feedback. We will have to learn how to deal with legitimate criticism. New norm will arise where it is considered unacceptable to reply with the same point that dozens of others have already made. So, in order to deal with legitimate criticism, in order to condense the feedback that we receive online, a new norm will come into existence. According to this new norm, you cannot reply with the same point that other people have already used. It is going to be unacceptable. And until then, if you go back to number one use the expression until then. Until then means till the time we don't have a new norm. Until then, we will all live under mob rule. Okay, till the time a new norm arises, until then refers to the time when the new norm will come. So till that time, we will all have to live under mob rule. That is why the order is 3, 2, 4, and 1. Please check and let me know if you have any doubt. These were the four TETA questions of CAT 2019 slot 1. Then there were three other questions in the first slot, but these three questions were based on odd one out. Five sentences are given, and four of them form a part of a paragraph. One of them is odd. Your job is to identify the odd one out, and as for an answer, you will choose the number of that sentence which is odd. as your answer, and you will key it in. So let us take a look. Question number 5 to question number 7. Your time starts now. You will have to find out which statement is odd. Let's try to find out which statement is the odd statement. If you look at statements 1 and statement number 4, statement number 1, statement number 4, because they use pronouns, you need some context. His idea and this, what prejudice are you talking about? You need to know. His idea, whose idea, you need to know. So if I try to arrange 4 of the statements, I know that 1 and 4 cannot be the starting statement. Number 2 gives you an example. If it gives you an example, again, it cannot be a starting point. So it is certain that your starting point is either 3 or 5. If you use 3 and 5, you will come to know that number 5 is more generalized, because number 5 tells you that for millennia, people with hearing impairments, they encountered marginalization. So people who could not hear properly, people who were deaf, they encountered marginalization. Okay, they were not taken seriously. Why? Because it was believed that language could only be learned by hearing the spoken word. This is what was believed. He gives you an example of this belief. In statement number 3, he tells you that people who were born deaf, they were denied the right to sign a will, as they were, again, presumed means believe. It was believed that they could not understand anything. It was believed that it is not possible that they have been able to learn to read or write. This is what was believed, right? So these people were marginalized, and this is the prejudice. This is the prejudice which he is discussing. Some people started fighting back against this prejudice. Pushback against this prejudice began in the 16th century when Pedro Leon, he created a formal sign language for the hearing impaired. He created a formal sign language, and why did he create it? you'll go to number one. His idea. Who is the expression is referring to Pedro. Pedro's idea was to use sign language, and it was not a completely new idea because Native Americans used hand gestures to communicate with other tribes. So 5341 is going to be the order because it talks about the belief that existed and one person developing the sign language as a pushback against this belief. Remember, it was belief, it was never proven right. It is number two that is odd. Statement number two is the odd statement because statement number two is saying that Aristotle observed that men who are deaf are incapable of speech. He is not talking about belief, he is talking about the reality. Your belief, your presumption, and reality can be very different. So all the others talk about belief. It is only number two that tries to say that actually this was real. That men who were deaf, they were incapable of speech. That is why it is the odd statement, and that is why two is the answer. Question number six. If you don't have any doubt, let's move to question number six. For question number six, you have 2 minutes. Your time is now. Okay, let's try to arrange the four statements and then find out which statement is odd statement. For that, we will have to find out our very first statement. You know that the first statement cannot be true because it begins with a pronoun. Number one also does not look like the first statement because it tells you the meaning. Stat meant something measurable. Matic meant free labor. Tron meant control. Okay. Number three talks about these morphemes. So again, you need a context. What morphemes are you talking about? Number five talks about the suffix. To gain the suffix, again, you need to know what suffix are you talking about. What does all this tell us? All this tells us that your first statement has to be number four because these expressions called tron, matic, and stat, they are introduced in number 4. He starts by saying that the historian Robert Proctor at Stanford University calls the suffix tron along with matic and stat embodied symbols. So tron, matic, and stat, these are embodied symbols. Embodied symbols means they have some hidden meanings. They have some meanings. This meaning, what is this meaning, is explained in number 1. Stat meant something measurable. Matic meant free labor. And tron indicated control. This is the embodied symbol. This is the meaning. What was the implication? If you if you had if you add stat, matic, or tron to something, then this expression is number 5. It to gain the suffix, that means if you include this suffix, that means you have acquired a very proud and optimistic emblem of the electronic and atomic age. Electronic and atomic age, anything that has the suffix stat, matic, or tron, it's like an emblem in this electronic and atomic age. And it is just like this emblem is just like the heraldic shields of ancient knights. Okay, in the earlier times, also the knights, they had heraldic shields, they had shields that would give a message. These morphemes means these expressions, these suffixes, because they were emblems, they were painted onto the names of scientific technologies to proclaim one's history and achievements to friends and enemies alike. Why were they painted? They were painted because they became an emblem. They were emblem. They were proud and optimistic emblem. And whoever had gained this suffix, they would very proudly paint these suffixes onto the names of their scientific technologies. Right. So 4153 talks about these morphemes, these suffixes. It is number 2 which is odd. It is number 2 which is odd because number 2 says it was a totem of high modernism. Totem again means emblem, symbol. So what is it? We don't know. What was an emblem of high modernism? The intellectual and cultural mode that decreed no process or phenomenon was too complex, grasped, managed, and optimized. So, number 2 talks about something that is beyond the scope of discussion in this passage. It says that this emblem, it actually showed that nothing was too complex. Everything could be grasped, managed, and optimized. But that is not true. That is not true. He never said that these emblems were easy, they were not complex. He never said that. He simply said that these suffixes, they were embodied symbols. They were like symbols. From there, we cannot say that these symbols gave the impression that everything is going to be very, very easy. That is why the odd statement is going to be 2. I hope you understand. If everything is clear, I will come to the last question for today. Question number 7, also odd one out. Your time starts now. Okay, in order to find out which statement is the odd statement, we will first try to see what this passage is talking about. If you see, uh, he is discussing something called complex identity in number two. In number three, he's talking about complex and multidimensional identities. In number five, also, he's talking about complex identities. In number four, he's talking about identity per se. Number one does not talk about identity at all. Okay, this should be the biggest indication that actually the odd statement is number one. But still, if I have to arrange these statements, because number four discusses identity per se and not a specific part of identity, which can be complex or multidimensional, is more generalized. Number four is more generalized. It tells us that identity is one of the most important features of organizations, but there exist opposing views among sociologists about how identity affects organizational performance. So identity is important, but there are opposing views. Now, if there are opposing views, he will in all probability next tell us what are these opposing views. So the first view is mentioned in number three. Some organizations have complex and multidimensional identities that span or combine categories, while other organizations possess narrow identities. Okay, some of them have complex and multidimensional identities, others have narrow identities. After that, I think you need to go to number five. Number five tells you those who think that complex identities are beneficial point to the strategic advantages of ambiguity and organizations' potential to differentiate themselves from competitors. People, people believe that there are advantages to complex identities. What are the advantages? If you have complex identity, there is ambiguity, and this allows you to differentiate yourselves from the competitors. Okay, so what is the opposing view? The opposing view is about how identity affects organizational performance. Some people believe complex identities are beneficial, whereas there are other people believe that complex identities there's a disadvantage, that it confuses audiences about an organization's role or purpose. So 5 and 2, they tell you what are the opposing views about how identity affects organizational performance. Two different views. Some people believe it is beneficial, other people believe it is confusing. It is only number one that does not fit in this discussion. So number one is the odd statement, because number one is saying one argument is that actors that do not fit within a single well-defined category may suffer an illegitimacy discount. So number one is talking about a single well-defined category. So this identity is single and well-defined. I can say he is discussing narrow identity. He's discussing the concept of narrow identity. But before you tell me people who don't people who don't fit in a narrow identity, first you need to tell me what exactly are the advantages and disadvantages of narrow identity. Just like you have first discussed the advantages and disadvantages of complex and multidimensional identities, similarly there may be opposing views about narrow identities also. So tell me about the pros and cons, and then you tell me that if there is any organization or any actor that does not fit within a narrow identity, then what happens? So it is something. Now, statement number one is talking about something that is going to be a part of a separate paragraph, and that is why it is the odd one. Please let me know if you have any doubt. We are through with all the 7 questions of CAT 2019 slot 1. If there are no queries, then with this, we will end the session. Take care, all of you. Have a nice day.